Good morning out there in YouTube land, and welcome to the Sonora Writers Group YouTube channel. And today we have a special guest, and her name is Michelle A. Carter, or better known as Mickey.
That's correct.
Hi, Mickey. So this morning I just want you to tell all of the listeners and watchers out there that are tuning in all about your book. I just finished reading it. It's fabulous. It's really very interesting. Very good book. And it's called From Under the Russian Snow by Michelle A. Carter. Michelle, all yours.
Well, first I'd like to tell you where the title came from. And right here, this flower is called Podznezhniki, and it's Russian. That's Russian for from under the snow.
Oh.
So that's where the title came from, and it's a symbol. It's a symbol of hope and renewal and rebirth. And in the eastern U.S., you can also see this flower that comes up through the snow.
Really?
And they call it snow bells, I think, something like that. But I've never seen it here in California, in the West anywhere. But it's really that's because this is a story of renewal, rebirth, and a number of other positive outcomes. Even though we're talking today about Russia in very different terms. This book started in actually 1995, so 24 years ago. I was invited to be the journalist in residence, United States Information Agency's journalist in residence in Russia. I had been traveling in Russia since 1988. I speak Russian, learned in 2 years of high school and 4 years of university, and I've been a newspaper editor or newspaper woman all my life since I graduated from the University of Missouri School of Journalism. So writing, I've been doing it since I could talk, I think, something like that. But this is my second book. My first one was Children of Chernobyl, Raising Hope from the Ashes, which Augsburg Press published in 1993. And that book was about the relief efforts to help children affected by the catastrophe at the Chernobyl nuclear plant. So actually I was on a book tour for that book when the director of the USIA Russia desk saw me in an interview. And she said, aha, editor, speaks Russian, knows Russia, you're my girl. So she would not give up. She started calling. And finally, my husband and I talked it over and decided that I could take a leave of absence from my job as editor of a daily newspaper and do this, to walk through this door.
Oh.
And he urged me to do it. He said, this is the next step in what you're doing. So I showed up in Moscow in my own apartment with only Russian neighbors who were very fascinated by what I was doing there. And so this is the story of that year. It tells about me serving as a midwife for the free press, a newly emerging free press in Russia. And remember, the Soviet Union dissolved in 1990, and Yeltsin was president. We were still coming out of some very, very difficult Soviet period, and we were interested, the United States had a very strong interest in seeing a free press develop as a part of a significant part of developing a democratic society. So we were giddy with possibilities. Oh, the world was everything that we were hoping it could be. The Cold War was over.
I know.
Only good things.
I remember those days.
Only good things. So I arrived January 3rd, just in time to celebrate my second Christmas that year, because I had the December 25th in California and then January 7th in Russia under the Orthodox calendar. So that was the beginning. It was, and I was there for a full year. And in July of that year, while I was in Russia and my son was visiting, was when my husband drowned in the Stanislaus River, right here, right at Clark Fork in Tuolumne County. So that gave a very different cast on everything that I had been doing. And I went back, I sort of out of fear that I didn't have enough money, or all of those fears that new widows must have. But I was afraid I was going to have to give back the grant since I hadn't yet finished it. But I went back, and that was and completed that story. So this book has two very distinct narrative arcs. One of them is my travel adventure part of being in Russia. Being in Russia at such an amazing, critical time, and my acquaintances and friends that I met traveling across the 11 time zones of this enormous country. And then the very personal arc of my marriage, my children, my family, my losing my husband, and coming to grips with what that was going to mean for me going forward. So that's the story.
Courageous.
Well,
You
sometimes
do what you have to do.
You do what you have to do. This was, but the time in Russia was very special to me, and I continued to. I was there in May of last year.
Really?
Actually, I'm part of book group meetings. It's available in Russia. It's not available in Russian, but the book is selling well in English.
Congratulations. So would you read some of it to us?
Well, I'm going to read, I think it's easier, bigger, if you'll
Yes,
forgive
yes.
me, to read from here. But this is an early segment that I particularly like about giving you an idea of the kinds of things I thought I knew all about Russia. I mean, I've been traveling there. I'd already made 10 or 12 trips during that period.
Okay.
So I thought I knew. I was wrong. Not long after I moved in, I was doing laundry in my bathtub when my smoke alarm started beeping. I'd installed it in the entryway, inside the padded Naugahyde door, just to please my husband, who worried about these things. I had absolutely no plan for what to do if it went off. I didn't smell smoke, so I opened the door to the landing a tad and caught a whiff coming from the lift. I grabbed the red plastic phone, turned over the receiver where I'd taped the number for police and fire, and dialed. I gave my address in my most careful Russian and told them the lift was on fire. By the time I hung up, I could hear a commotion in the hallway. My next door neighbors were on the landing sloshing basins of water into the lift. Right behind them were the neighbors on the other side with their pails full. The fire hissed back, sizzled, and went out. Of course, my smoke detector was still beeping its heart out. I popped the battery out to shut it up and then joined my neighbors to start the cleanup. That's when I told them I'd called the fire department and launched a new firestorm. No, you never, ever call the firemen, they shouted at me. They'll just come and look in your apartment and see what you have for them to steal. Don't call the police either. They will steal everything. I kept repeating how sorry I was, that I didn't know I shouldn't call. The neighbors on either side of me were sharing the emotional pain of having to explain the realities of life to the Amerikanka. when we heard the sirens. In an instant, they scuttled like June bugs into their flats, slammed the doors, and snapped all of the deadbolts. I heard the firemen, and I called down from the 5th floor to tell them the fire was out, that I didn't need them. Would they please go away? Not a chance. They clambered up the stairs, peered into the lift. However, the real object of their interest was the Americanka. No Muscovite in her right mind would have called them for a fire in the lift. I told them I only called because my smoke detector went off. Now the guy in charge took over. What's that? Smoke detector. It tells me if there's a fire. Show me this smoke detector.
Oh no.
Now I knew I was in trouble. I could almost hear my neighbors huddled behind their dead-bolted doors clucking, "No, no, don't do it." But I did, and what a show it was. Once I got the battery back in, the firemen all crowded into my entryway and took turns setting the gizmo off by lighting matches under it and cheering it on. No doubt about it, it had to be the only smoke detector in Moscow. I'd barely gotten back to my laundry when Team 2 showed up. The commander or captain or whatever he was had decided that this was a find worth sharing. For the rest of the afternoon, firemen came up in shifts to flick their lighters under my smoke detector and chuck each other on the shoulder as it burst out beeping. I was exhausted by the end of the day. I wasn't the least bit worried about the firemen coming back to steal me clean, but I felt awful about letting my neighbors down. I didn't see them for days, so I knew they were waiting behind closed doors until they heard me leave. Their disappointment hung in the air.
Very good. And you read really well.
Oh, thank you.
That was
Thank you.
great. That was very entertaining. Thank you. So now we need to know, where can we get this fabulous little book?
This book, all 253 pages, I think.
She's still small.
Well, it's 75,000 words.
Okay.
Words.
Okay.
I was told that
That's a novel.
that was a good size for a book, but my other book was longer. But this one, particularly, I'm an editor. I excess words.
Yeah.
They're gone. They're gone. And my daughter was my great helper. She's a published short story writer, and she has her MFA in fiction, and so she was #1 editor for this.
Well,
she would track changes, and on one side it would say, "Oh, this is good. This is good." Then there was one that said, "This is crap." So that had to go.
So
But
now it's excellent.
now it's excellent.
And where can we get it?
It's available at Mountain Bookstore in Sonora, and it's also available on Amazon. And if you go to my website, which is from undertherrussiansnow.org, no spaces, there's a button on the bottom of the home page that will take you to a place. It's indie books, independent Publishers Association also sells it there.
Okay.
And so if you want to support independent books but don't want to go to Mountain Bookstore, you can get it there.
Okay, very good. Mountain Bookstore, Amazon, on her website at
FromUnderTheRussianSnow.org.
Okay. Thank you very much, Michelle.
Thank you. This has been delightful.
Bye.